So hello everybody. Okay. Oh, that's it. Hello, and so happy to have all of you out on this winter morning afternoon. Uh, we've eaten into our time, I think, so I'll just get started. We are talking translation. We are talking translation my way. Translation, is it transcreation? How important is the author to a translator? How rooted is a translator? How rooted does a translator need to be able to translate an author? I will begin with a query, and I think I'll begin with Ramaswamy. You were giving me a word. In one word, translate Be'ai, Beyan.
Yeah.
This is about the rootedness or cultural.
Be'ai or Beyan is a relationship. You know, in most of the Indian languages, we have very specific words for every kind of relationship. Elder brother, younger brother, older niece, younger nephew, all that. Anyway, so like that, this is also very specific. So when a relationship comes about because of marriage, so if I am a woman and I am living in my husband's house or his parents' house, then if my brother or my...
Sorry, but is there one word for Be'ai?
No, I'm explaining what it stands for.
Yes, so, they all know.
So the relationship is via marriage, yeah.
Yes.
But I can't remember how I translated it in one of my books, but I did find out what it was. And I asked some of my friends what they thought it should be. You know.
I set out on this quest after having lived in Bombay, where the first language I spoke outside home was Sindhi, which I can't read. I never read because my friends, we were that high, and my friends were Sindhi, so we were speaking Sindhi. And once I stepped onto the streets, it was Marathi, Gujarati, until I went to school where it was mostly Hindi, Bombaya Hindi, but Hindi and English. So there began my life in English. And in Bombay, we've always translated. So I never thought that translation was something special. But I'll once again go back to Ramaswamy, having started with him. Just this morning we were talking, Navamalati and I, and we realized that all of us, we have a certain purpose, we have a certain focus in what we are translating, how we are going on. So another word for that is activism. And Ramaswamy, I'm amazed how much he has, sought out the voice. He's become the voice of the marginalized writing in Bengali. And he, coming from Tamil Nadu, his ancestors, if not him, like I am from Bombay, though not by ancestry. Please, will you give us a brief outline of how activism became your springboard for translation and why you think of translation as an extension of your activism?
Right. Thank you. After I finished my studies at the age of 24, by dint of circumstance, I met a person, an architect planner, who came to Calcutta in 1970. His name was Joy Shen, and he set up an organization called Unnayan in Garcha Road in Kolkata with the idea of advocating planning for the unplanned section of the city. He wrote an essay called Calcutta, the Unintended City, and then he used that essay as the backdrop for developing a project and setting up of this organization Unnayan, which would try to ensure that East Calcutta, which was then going to come up for development with the bypass being built and so on. So how the future of East Calcutta could be different from what the rest of Calcutta has experienced, which was basically displacement and marginalization. So the lives, livelihoods and aspirations of the marginalized section, how those can come to the forefront of planning. That was his vision. So I worked in that organization for some years, but before that I got drawn into their campaign against evictions of squatters in Calcutta in the mid-80s. And a squatter organization was established called Chinnamul Shromojibi Odhikar Shomiti, which means Organization for the Rights of Uprooted Laboring People. So I was in that organization, and that defined my life thereafter, and my decisions and choices and so on. I spent about 2 decades in activism for squatters, slum dwellers and so on, and then I was also in a government planning project trying to carry my activist goals into the government's agenda. And then subsequently started
Is that what became a springboard for your translation, getting into the government?
Yeah. Also, I set up a Basti organization in an old, century-old Basti in Howrah. So it was from that background that by chance I happened to hear the name of Shubhimal Mishra. And then when I started reading his work, that struck a chord in me, because he was writing about the underdog, and he was writing about the Bhadralok society and the hypocrisy and so on. And so I was it was easy for me to relate to that writing and translate it. It was a homecoming of sorts in terms of writing being about the world that I had dwelt in for 2 decades. So that was the springboard to translation. And then, true to my past activist kind of temperament, with Shubhimal Mishra, at least it wasn't just translation, but I was an activist for the dissemination of his name, across the country and abroad as well. I was campaigning on Shubhimal Mishra for a few years. And yes, I've translated 4 of his books. The last one was published 2024. And through that, many people have now learnt his name outside West Bengal and outside Calcutta, and people of other regions and other languages. So that was possible only because of that kind of activist thrust that I gave to that particular author.
Unheard voices you started bringing out. Navamalati, I will come to you now. You started your activism. We decided that, we are all coming from a certain point in life, certain point of view in life, and carrying forward, choosing the authors in keeping with that perspective. So you chose to translate first your father and then other Assamese writers. Will you tell us why you chose to start with your father?
Honestly, I didn't start with my father. What happened was, it was a request made by an economist who happened to write a novel about Kaziranga. He was insistent that I translate, and I told him I have never translated. So I went ahead and read his book, and I realized that maybe economist and writer, the two things may come together, but for this gentleman, it must have been his first time. So the chapters were a little here, there, everywhere, And I spoke to him, I read the book, and he said that you can adjust them as you want. So what I did was, I brought the third chapter first, and that way, and then I realized that he has put a lot of poetry into the novel. Of course, it was a wonderful novel, and most of us, we do not know what happened every year. Every year, Kaziranga has floods, and because of the floods, so many animals suffer, they die, and then there are the poachers, they're always at it. So it was a beautiful novel, and ultimately I did it. And that was the beginning, an unwilling beginning, but then it inspired me, and I went ahead. One after the other, I started, in fact, it had infected me, because within 2 months, 3 months, I started finishing translating books, and no one would believe it. So I do only one work of one writer, because there are so many writers in Assam, they are so good. And finally, I was teaching in Calcutta University, and when I taught Assamese novels, so the students would ask me, "Ma'am, can we get a translation?" So somewhere at the back of my mind, it was working. It was working, and then there is the name of Lakshminath Bejborua. His memoir was there. It was very tough in the sense that I think 2% Assamese books I have translated. One is Lakshminath Bejborua's, and one is my father's. I think they are reputed to be real tough writers, in the sense that they have their own style, their own narration, their own choice of vocabulary, which are so ingrained into the Assamese diction. So automatically, both of the books, Lakshminath Bejborua and my father's, they were memoirs. They were memoirs. And after that, what happened was, let me tell you, Lakshminath Bejborua is called the Maharathi in Assamese, and Sahitya Rathi in Assamese, and my father is called the Maharathi. So automatically they have to be a little difficult from the others. And then I have done other works also, and all the famous Gyanpith Award winner, Birendra Bhattacharya, and all the books are remarkable.
Yes, we'll come back to your selection of the authors. We'll come back again to the subject. Meanwhile, I'm going to ask Anjana. Anjana, you have 10 novels or 11 to your credit, apart from your poems and collections of poetry. Why do you still choose the, I would put in quotes, the subservient role of a translator?
Well, actually, in this case, it was very different, because I was pounced on by Rituparno. We met in advertising. I was at that stage beginning to move on from my totally English-speaking self to communicating in Bangla with ad agency people, because I'd started school in England, so I really didn't speak much Bangla. Rituparno suddenly realized that I would probably, since I translated every piece of Bangla I heard into English in my head, he said, right, you are going to do my subtitles. You are also going to do my scripts, which I need to send to people. And very frankly, I didn't think it was subservient. I kind of had fun working with him.
I know it certainly isn't, and but a screenplay, for example, a screenplay writer is never known for the films. The director, the film is always credited to the director, and the subtitles are always based on dialogue. So that's why I use the word subservient.
Yeah, I know, but as I said, it was great fun because it was him, and actually we also worked on the screenplays together.
Yes, subsequently you've translated his screenplays.
Yeah.
You did it after he passed away?
No, because it used to come to me. I mean, I would get these chitronatros. So Shei chitronatros had to be translated because he would want to send the whole thing to some film
Producer.
festival or producer.
Okay.
So therefore, it was not just the subtitles. When it came to the subtitles, I actually used to argue with him because he would chuck out all my articles. He said, please do not bring in this, that, and the other. We don't have space on the screen. So that was one major kind of argument, but...
One major feature of translating,
Yes.
where you had to forego the article.
Yeah.
Finally, star of this session, Bultu. I'm sorry. Bultu and I, we go back many years in many situations, so please forgive me. Although he's the star translator, Arunava. So should I stick to Arunava? You have said that translation came at a point when it helped you to avert a midlife crisis. You've been an ace, a top-notch editor of journalism, print journalism and online. You were one of the the frontline people to go into online journalism. Why did you face a midlife crisis?
Thank you. All translators are stars, and it's not defined by how many books they do. Everything that we read around the world that's not in our own language is actually words written by translators. And the best thing is that readers place their trust in translators to believe that this is Garcia Marquez, or this is Dostoevsky, or this is Han Kang, when the words have been chosen by a different set of people.
We've not
altogether.
known the translators, we've only known the authors.
Which is exactly what translators intend to do. If it's they who become known, then it's not a good translation, obviously. So midlife crisis, no, I was just at the right age when you start questioning everything that you've done till then. And sometimes journalism, when you're in it, it may seem very important, but when you look back on it, sometimes it seems quite ephemeral. It's here today, gone tomorrow. What have you really done? People are leading their own lives irrespective of anything. So you start questioning, and the opportunity to translate was really gift.
You just mentioned that no translator, I mean, the intention of a translator is never to outdo the author. I mean, a translator should never or is generally not better known than the author. But in your case, there are books where people have picked up the book because it's translated by Arunava Sinha.
No, I wish that were true. If that were true, then they'd be selling in very many more numbers than they do. Rama will know this, and all of you will know this.
I will come to Rama on this. But
I-
why did you pick up, he's mentioned why he went to Shubhimal Mishra, but you have translated Manoranjan Vyapari, who was not such a, he's not as famed as Shankar or Asha Purna Devi. So why did you go to these names?
So I was moving on from translating the...
Essentially, what prompts your selection of what next?
That's changed over the years. I started out with the so-called canon, and many people wanted to read those writers. They were well known, but their works were not in English. So it began there. But over a period of time, I realized that there are a lot of writers who are not even well known enough in their own language, like Rama pointed out. And interestingly, translation can actually turn that around. The writer then becomes well known in their own language also because of the translations. So, and it felt, it was exciting to read them. You know, translators read text very closely. You don't just read as a reader. And then after a while, you start seeing that there are other ways of writing.
Sort of scan a piece of work. I mean, scan is a technical term we've learned only after computers. But actually, translators go not into the words, not into the sentences, but also what is beyond them, right?
In fact, primarily what is beyond them. That's the main thing.
Otherwise, they would be so boring and so stiff. Coming to Anjana, you are a poet. Have you translated your own poems?
No, I can't translate from English into Bangla. But Rituparno made me translate Joy Goswami.
Okay.
He made me translate Ravi Thakur.
Into
and
English.
Into English.
Okay.
And he was of the opinion I did a better job on Ravi Thakur than I did on Joy. But, well.
I would like to know from you, what is more difficult to translate, poetry or prose?
Okay, I think it depends, at least for me, it depends on how much I love what I'm reading. I find that if I love the poem, I can do the rhythm and I can actually rhyme it as well. Because it just comes.
Do you have to rhyme when you translate a poetry?
I feel one should be true, perhaps, to the translation of the poem. Yeah. I also used to do Rituparno songs, no? So those songs were also rhymed.
Yeah. Songs, of course, had to fit into a certain meter, into a certain...
Poetry also does that, actually.
Navamalati, I had asked you earlier, why did you start with your father? And you said that it wasn't exactly the purpose. But I'll go back to that question and ask you, was there ever any question of copyright? Did that by any chance prompt you to pick up your father's? I have, in my own case, I can tell you, done that on occasions because I did not have the time, or, you know, I mean, like often we are working against time. So has copyright ever been an issue when you pick up a book? I'll come to you also. Yes.
That's a difficult question. When it comes to copyright, I think I was so much into translation I forgot about that angle, which I think I should have been very careful about. My father's memoir, then Bejborua's memoir, which I had translated, I learned that they have sold a lot. But although the copyright is basically in my name, the publishers have never really come forward. In fact, this book, Yatra, it was published by Neog Books, and I received my royalty, and I was a little surprised because it never comes. So I was very happy about that. But I feel translators must come together as a body and discuss this matter about the copyright and about
the royalty or the fees for translation.
Yes.
You've hit upon a nerve point. I will come back to you, Ramaswamy. I have translated and never got money for translations, or peanuts, if at all. But that has, you know, that's why I took note of the fact that you've got fellowships and grants for translations. How important are these for you to carry on the translation work, and why?
Yeah, they're absolutely vital, or at least in my case, it was so. I translated one book, collection of early stories of Shubhimal Mishra, and that book came out in 2010. And by then I had also decided to carry on translating Shubhimal Babu. And one day I just Googled writer residencies, and thus I found Sangam House, and I applied and I was selected. So in January of 2011 I attended Sangam House for 3 weeks. So that is what really made me a translator, because you sit all day from morning to evening and day after day and week after week just doing translation. Unless you actually go through that exercise, you wouldn't have done something like that maybe since you left school or university, you know, just sitting in one place with a book and a notebook all day and day after day. So that was vital as a starting point. Subsequently, I did a long work. It was a trilogy of novels by Manoranjan Bapari. So I got a fellowship in Wales, and I spent 3 months doing that. I translated 170,000 words in 3 months, and I had to do another 50,000 words to complete the first 2 books. And those 50,000 words took me 8 months to finish, sitting in Calcutta and attending to other things. So in a residency, that's all that you are doing. You're there to complete that work, and translation requires a huge amount of time. Translation means labor over time. And there in a residency you have that scope. So in the years since then, other residencies I have attended, and they have come up also. I have vague plans of also starting a residency myself, and I inducted a fellow translator into the group Thinking Cap group on that score.
Thank you. I come back to you, Bultu. You are teaching at Ashoka University, and you teach translation. So how do you teach translation, and what do you think in the coming years, in the coming decades maybe, we'll have translation as a vocation?
Well, we know that in commercial terms it's difficult. You have to be doing other work and you translate on the side. But teaching translation has shown me that young people are really very good at it. They are much more in touch with their own languages than we imagine. Their minds are not yet muddied by too much of reading stuff around the world, and they're very keen on making a mark. Most of all, they want to rekindle relationships with their own languages. So in our class we have people between say 17 and 20 or 21 working on languages from all parts of India, translating into English mostly. And we workshop everything. We treat our classes like workshops. And we've actually 3 of our students have been published already, and 2 more are going to be published. And we have at least another half a dozen completed works in translation which are out there in search of publishers.
I'm very happy to point out to you at this point, it's a little personal, but Devottam, who you were his local guardian when he joined the law school in Bangalore, he translated when, before he went to Bangalore actually, he translated my father's, Navendu Ghosh's Ami O Ami in Bengali. In English it's Me and I, it's a science fiction. And as you mentioned, it started because I used to read out the Bengali to him in trying to get him to know his own language. He was in Delhi. We were growing up. He was growing up in Delhi. We were in Delhi, and Bengali wasn't the language he heard outside home. So that is how, and it became, you know, a kind of process, because he was thinking in English, and every time I would read out a sentence, he would say, "Oh, this," and if he got stuck, he would ask, "What would that be?" and so on. So that is, yes, absolutely, when young people start understanding how to translate, or start, when they have the desire to translate, they are into another culture. Here I'm also going to bring in, you said something extremely important in one of the interviews, where you said that translation is the future of democracy. Will you please elaborate when you say that, you know, why we need not just translations into English, but also from one language to another, from Assamese to Bengali, from Bengali to Tamil, and so on?
It's very straightforward. We have to understand one another. We have to understand one another's lives, one another's stories. Literature is the medium through which our lives get perpetuated for other people to know about. There's no other way, right? I mean, especially if you think of cinema as a sort of subset of literature. And how are we going to do it if we cannot read somebody else's language? We are increasingly, between language chauvinism, between the insistence on a national language, and this whole thing of binding our identities to specific languages, we are trapping ourselves in cages. And this is not going to help democracy. Democracy is about everyone participating, knowing what everybody else wants. It's not just self-interest.
Navamalati, you had said something like Assamese was not so well known. Assamese writers were not so well known outside of Assam, or outside of Northeast, perhaps. I'll ask you one thing. India was when independence came, India was restructured on the basis of language. How important, actually, it partly also, I'll expect Arunava to address, how important or how damaging was that? The carving out of the states on linguistic basis.
Well, there are so many Assamese nice writers from earlier times, but somehow or the other, the books were not really translated. Assamese people love to read them, they read them, and they are satisfied. So, when I translated Lakshminath Bezborua's memoir, it was after 170 years. So, immediately after I translated, the first reactions I felt was quite critical. They said, "Did you manage to do it? What do people say after reading?" So gradually, I needed some time, and then I realized that they were accepting it. But that acceptance was not forthcoming right immediately. It took time. It took time because they thought that Saitarath's Assamese can never turn to English. And there are idioms, syntax, prepositional problems, then use of, such words which, because of the lack of, I think because of people not using those words had become almost extinct.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but my question was a little bit different, I'll come back to you, but I'll also involve Rama in this. Has the formation of the states on linguistic basis, has it been detrimental to Indian democracy, or has it helped?
Perhaps it's
If so, why did Sahitya Academy need to include languages other than in the 8th schedule?
right. Perhaps it's too early to come to a decision about that. And in the meanwhile, lots of complications have come up, like language chauvinism, one nation, one language, etc., etc. It just muddies the water even more. But I think it has been quite definitional since the linguistic states have come up. They have helped to form the identities of people, which is positive, but it can also be restrictive. So, as we know, in West Bengal or from Bengal, there were people from Bengal living in what is now Jharkhand, what is Bihar, UP, and Lahore. We heard earlier this morning about Bengali community in Lahore. So Bengalis were there everywhere, and in states with other languages, and then they made their mark over there within that culture and so on. In South India, you have South Indians living in all parts of India for 100 years now. My grandfather came in 1930 to Kolkata for a job, and just that chance occurrence has been definitional for my father and for me, and my children also. They were also defined by growing up here and learning Bangla and so on. So I'm more interested in translation, in multilinguality, interlinguality, and in collaborations and so on. And it is a great disappointment and almost a tragedy that in 1947, the thing that nobody thought of, all those giants of our freedom movement and early days of independence, never confronted this issue of translation and how significant and important it is for the future of our republic, and to have a vision of the kind of citizens that they want in their future nation, multilingual citizens. We should have had our education system and our socialization and family all about multilinguality, you know. And it's tragic that now we are going to one nation, one language.
Anjana, please tell us how translation, in terms of subtitle, how it's knitting Indian cinema, or rather world cinema, because we wouldn't have known Akira Kurosawa, Ingmar Bergman, name any of them, the Polish directors, the Russians, and so on and so forth, the Greek, Theo Angelopoulos, any of them we wouldn't have known but for the translations of the subtitles of the dialogues.
It's actually the same thing as any other translation. Your work is to ensure that the filmmaker's meaning is clear and gets across to the audience so that it is understood. As I was saying, there was
But the subtitle writer has another constraint to work within, that the screen, the visual is the important thing. And you have to bring in, you know, there are languages where you speak a lot of word, and that in English it might be a short sentence, or the opposite could be true.
As long as it conveys the meaning. For example, you will realize that a lot of English films have subtitles which actually translate the dialogues, because people cannot catch what is being said, American film, the accent. So it is actually the same thing. You need to get it across clearly, briefly, and so that the subtitle counterpoints the visual. And that is how it works. And as a matter of fact, they are now talking about subtitles for Oscars, because I believe people have realized that subtitling is fairly important to the film industry.
Certainly, I mean, I having been on the jury of National Film Awards, you know, initial years, they used to translate. Someone used to, sitting behind, used to translate, and we used to listen to the dialogues while watching the film, which had no subtitles. So you're talking about Oscars, which is so many years later. We started, and that's where that important thing, so important in a country like India, how important for the democracy to survive. Yes. You're wrapping up on this question.
Oh, I thought I answered that already.
You have, but after
No,
the
I mean,
cinema
it's as Rama said, you know, imagine if language were to be his sole identity, then Rama would be turned out saying he's a Tamil. And that's the most ridiculous thing to say for someone like him who's taking Bangla Sahitya to other parts of India and to the world.
Why hasn't Rama taken any of Tamil work to Bangla?
Yeah,
Allow me to be a little...
I don't know Tamil as well as I know Bangla. Recently, I need to travel to South India often. So once when I was in Tamil Nadu, I thought if I live here for an extended period of time, I'll become proficient once again. But the kind of grasp I have over matters Bengal and now also Bangladesh, and the understanding and the intuitive awareness of all kinds of things, I would never in my life acquire that even if I lived in Tamil Nadu. It's because I grew up and lived all my life in West Bengal and penetrated certain domains like grassroots and so on. So I became familiar with the language as it is used by different strata.
Sorry to interrupt. If I may bring your question back to the idea of translation.
Right.
In nowhere can you have a single story. In India, you certainly cannot have a single story. And if today we were to say that translation is going to be the means through which all our stories get known to each of us in our own language, most important, not in a language that we have to go out and learn, but making it our own, because when you read a story in a language that you read in, it becomes your own story. And so with all these multiple stories, any notion that India is a monolith and needs to have one particular set of ideas controlling it will just go out the window.
I will bring in my own observation on this. Why I'm harping on this is Ramayana. When Valmiki wrote it, probably in Sanskrit, some form of Sanskrit, but when Kambana wrote it, he wrote in a different language. When Tulsi wrote it, it's a different language, and it's a different creation. It's a different, it creates a different identity for Ram. You know, one is a hero, the other is a human being. The other, third one perhaps is, there have been Meghnad Bad Kavya where he's a villain, and so on. So a translator is a transcreator. In the case of Ramayana, we've seen that. Yeah. So every piece of literature can be written in another language, and it can become the original in that language. So in that sense, now this is again a purposely naughty question. How important is an author to a translator? I will ask all of you very briefly. This is virtually, I think we are at the end of our time. So very briefly, in 3 sentences, how important is an author to a translator?
Yeah.
3 sentences.
Needless to say, supremely important. In my case, I become the author and inhabit his soul, as it were, fully. that's me. So it's completely important.
Yeah. Without the author, the filmmaker, there is no translator. What are you translating? You have to interpret the author, the filmmaker's meaning, soul, and everything else. So.
Well, I feel translation is a discipline that has come to stay, and it's very because
You translated an author who lived 100 years ago, right? But 150 years ago. You couldn't go to him if you were in doubt, or if he has written a certain text. So when you translate it, how loyal, or if you have any doubts about what he wrote, or if you have a little difference, how do you bridge over that?
Okay. That's a very nice question, because I did have, and I found out my own solution. What I did was, when I did find a lot of difficulties here, there, everywhere, and the moment I face something like that, I know it is time for me to keep my pen down and think over it. At times, after half an hour, I find the answer to it. At times, it takes me 2-3 days. It goes round my head, and I keep dwelling, and I go back to my...
You put ... and then go on to the next sentence and the next para? Or you stop
I never
there? And,
advance.
okay.
Okay. The text is all important for me. I don't try to step into the author's shoes because I'm not capable of doing that. What matters to me at that moment is the text and all that the text is telling me, and the entire world that it is creating, not just through the dictionary meanings of the words, but everything that goes with it. That's paramount. And that's the text that I'm trying to take into another language.
Sacrosanct. So the author is sacrosanct.
In the sense that the author of that text.
Right. I think the 40 minutes allotted to us is complete. Do we take questions? We are open to questions. Time up, it says. 0-0. We've managed it rather well, I must say. Covered a lot of grounds. Any questions, anybody? Yes, I see one hand there, second one over here.
Good afternoon.
Please
everyone.
introduce yourself, give your name and your background.
My name is Abdullah Sheikh. I am a student. Very good afternoon to everyone. And my question is to Arunava Sinha. The question is that the writers who are born and brought up in Bangla and who knows Bangla well, and he's writing his works in English. And sometimes it happens that some thoughts are coming in Bangla and he's writing, or rather translating his thought in English. When you are translating that Bengali thought that has been translated into English in Bangla, are you not becoming the original writer here? This is the question.
Yeah, great question. Ideally, you could go to him and say, what were your thoughts in Bangla, in English, and let me put them down here. But I had an interesting experience translating Amitabh Ghosh's Gun Island into Bangla, where a lot of his characters were speaking in Bangla in the Gun Island. His characters from Bangladesh were speaking in Bangla in Venice, and he had translated them into English. So putting those words back in Bangla was restoring them to their original language. So it was a very interesting experience, I have to say, because I had to then go to the people who spoke that particular version of Bangla and ask them, how would you say this, and so on. So yeah, all kinds of interesting loops happened there. Thank you for the question.
May I just add one experience we lost Shyam Benegal very recently. A few months before that, I think last year, when Mujib released, I was speaking with Shyam. I called him up and I was telling him that I'm about to go and see Mujib. The English version was showing close to my house. So he said, why? You have to see it in Bengali. I have so many actors from Bangladesh, and even if I'm not so conversant, I know that the accents, even in the little districts in Bangladesh, are different. So please go and see it in Bengali. And particularly when you're talking about Mujib, it's very important to see the film in Bangla. And so the importance of language, not only language, but the dialects of language, he had underscored. Lady at the back, yes. Please give your name and... Yes.
Hello, my name is Tista, and I have a question for Mr. Sinha. I saw your book, which has an anthology of greatest short stories of India. And my question is, what defines a great Indian short story, according to you? Thank you.
That's a great question. And it's not a finite set. A great story is a great story. And we picked 50 of them and put them in one book. We could probably do another 100 books. What makes it great? That's not an answer to be given at the end of a panel on translation. Entire syllabuses and courses on literature are based around this. But ultimately it's the reader who decides.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for being such good listeners. Thank you.